Hey, got any of that foam clay I've been hearing about? Yes. Oh, of course. There you go. Thanks, man.
These are bottle caps.
Hey there, fellow maker. Welcome to the shop. We've got a special guest today and a special material.
That's right, guys. Steve from SKS Props, and today I've got foam clay.
Your own foam clay.
That's right. You can actually pick this up over at sksprops.com for purchase.
Yeah, and a bunch of other really fantastic cosplay materials.
That is correct.
Today we're going to dive into this material. Now, I've been seeing the internet, the cosplay community all over, foaming at the mouth for more stuff with foam clay, and I haven't really had a chance to dive into it. So today, what are we going to do, Steve?
Well, foam clay is an extremely versatile material, and we're going to be using it in some push molds and doing some sculpting and showing you guys kind of what it does.
Fantastic. Well, I'm excited to dive in and get my hands dirty, so let's get started.
So one of the first things that we're going to do is use some foam clay in push molds. Push molds are great because you can pick up a lot of detail, and this type of material does pick up a lot of detail as long as you're using it properly. Now, the only thing is with the push molds, when you put it in here, you are going to need to put it into a freezer or something for about 24 hours so that it can solidify a little bit, so that when you do demold it, you are not distorting it. So let's jump into that. Foam clay itself is a non-toxic air drying clay. And the thing that's really, really cool about this is that it's extremely malleable. And when you get it out of there, you actually do want to stretch it out and kind of get some elasticity to it. And that will actually help you pick up a lot more of the details that are in these molds. Now, this is a little horn that I had sculpted earlier, and so we're just going to see if it can pick up all these little details. And one thing I've really found out with the molds that's good to do is not to press all of it in at once. You actually want to kind of layer it, and what that will do is minimize the amount of air bubbles that are in the surface.
Now you're just filling that up to the top?
Correct. I'm just going to fill this one all the way up. It should help with the demolding process. All right, so I think that one will be all good. So at this point, it's all in there, but you can see that it has a lot of give to it. So we're going to put this in the freezer for 24 hours so that the clay will help solidify. The other molds that we have, Bill has some here that have an extremely glossy surface, so we're going to see what kind of a surface detail we can get. We've got one with a wood grain, one with some stone pebble work, and then some nuts and bolts. Now, the thing that's also really great about foam clay for details is that it's extremely lightweight, so you can glue this stuff to any of the other EVA foam products that you have. For this one, we're actually not going to fill it up. I just want to press it in here to show you the level of detail that it's able to pick up from this wood texture. So you can see all the little wood grain textures that are built into this mold came right out of that clay. And again, if you were to let that sit and air dry, all of those will just be built into it. This one is going to be the gloss surface that's on the inside there. I just want to see how well it picks that up once it fully cures. I think it's probably good enough for that one.
Very good.
And last one, we're going to try this Skyrim ring. The great thing about this stuff too is, if you notice, I'm not using gloves or anything. Again, this is a non-toxic material, so don't be afraid to use it in your home. You know, and it's just like when you're doing like a silicone into any of these too. This first layer you're putting in is kind of the print layer. And then you can kind of backfill it and not be quite as careful just to fill it up. And once it solidifies, it'll actually have the consistency of EVA foam, and we can sound that flat on a belt sander. All right, now it's time to throw these in the freezer so that they'll set up. For this example, I'm going to try to replicate, the same basic horn that I did for the push mold. But if I didn't have enough time to do a push mold and then wait for that one to dry and then make another one, we're going to make a basic spike and then just use some dremeling techniques to sculpt it out. And what this will really come down to is you can use like silicone tips, work great on this. You want to make sure to wet them, and you can press into the clay. Now, because the clay is kind of a spongy material, it will actually bounce back some. If you want a deeper crevice in there, you want to push harder than what you would think. Now for this example, I'm just going to be putting a couple of these in. Primarily, most of the detail I'm going to do after it dries with a rotary tool. So at this point, I think I'm just going to let it air dry, and tomorrow I'll go in with some sanding sponges and rotary tool to see how close I can get it to my original sculpt. Once you're done using this product, the biggest thing to make sure is that you reseal your bag, because it is an air dry, it can actually mess with what's left in here. So I got enough for that. The rest of it goes back in the tub. And you know what's great about this is once you're done, you have a cool tub left over.
It's tomorrow. And we just pulled these out of the freezer and we're ready to demold them.
All right, so we've got a little bolt here. And again, these they're still cold, but they have not fully cured yet. So after it comes out, you just put them in the freezer to help it kind of solidify, and then you still want to let it rest for about another 24 hours just to completely cure.
Okay.
Oh, detail on that came out great.
It really did. Look at that. I can see some tiny little surface bubbles, but if I was making like a post-apocalyptic thing, that would be totally cool.
Well, that, and I was pressing them in there pretty quick. I mean, if you were more diligent about really pressing the clay in there and minimizing those surface bubbles, you know, it'd be good.
Awesome. I want to demold this one. I'm curious to see how shiny it stayed. Oh, all right. It's kind of shiny. You can definitely see how putting multiple pieces in and how tricky it could be to keep from getting those bubbles. But the surface finish is quite shiny. It's definitely not the gloss that we got out of the mold. You were telling me before that this stuff shrinks a little bit?
Yeah, it'll shrink about 15%.
Okay, so that may account for the change in surface quality. We also have to let these dry fully. Maybe tomorrow we'll take a peek and see how they look.
Yeah.
So let's demold a couple more. I'm excited about this one.
This one had a lot of surface texture on it.
Nice. That is really cool. Okay, now the really cool one.
Sculpted a little horn out of monster clay, and we did a really quick mold.
Oh my goodness.
And it did a pretty good job picking up a lot of those little details.
Yeah.
Again, it's not resin, you know. It's not a liquid, so you're forcing it in there, but for a clay product, that's pretty impressive.
Right. Now you sculpted one yesterday, and that is dried.
Correct.
You did try to put a lot of surface detail into this, but you can see how when you use a mold, you're able to capture a lot more of that.
Right, and once this one fully cures, I'd like to go in with a rotary tool and bring out a lot more of the details, because I think that sanding them afterwards, you can get a lot of really good structure that way.
Fantastic. We'll try that in a little bit. But now we're going to try doing some sculpting on another piece of foam. This handsome gentleman is going to help us out. I made a quick pattern out of duct tape to make a domino mask, flipped it over to make the other side, and cranked that out of foam. This is just 4mm foam. I put some duct tape, or no, what is this?
Two-sided tape.
Double-sided tape, thanks Steve, on there so we can stick it to his face and hopefully sculpt some stuff on there. So I started with this foam base because I figured that would be more cost-effective use of materials. You could probably just sculpt the whole thing out of foam clay. But if you're doing something really gigantic like armor, basing it in a sheet of EVA foam and then doing the detail in your clay, I think is probably a more cost-effective.
Yeah, definitely. I think that'd be structurally as well. I mean, you've got a nice, good base for this to go on.
So what do we just start pressing clay into it, or?
The first thing that I would point out is that they recommend to put water on the foam that you are using, and it helps the foam clay adhere a little bit better. Same thing with any of the tools or your hands. I would recommend to wet them, and then that will help smooth the clay out. Now, the big thing to note when you're doing this is, once again, this doesn't have to be the finished surface. I would still always recommend to go back in the end of it and sand it down.
So we'll plan on that, because we're going to have to sculpt it on here and then let it dry overnight. Like you did before, just grab a piece and kind of do the, work it a little bit?
Yeah, kind of knead it out.
It's like taffy.
Yeah, you can tell how it really gets a lot more elasticity once you knead it a little bit.
Yeah, also it's got a little bit of like a greasy feel in there, and once you work it a little bit, that seems to go away. One of the other nice things about having this form is I can use the edge of it to kind of guide my sculpt. So I have this boundary I can work with. It's like a paint by numbers, but for sculpting. So I'm just trying to get like a base layer down that I can hopefully then refine. But I'm just making sure that I press it into the surface. Hopefully it sticks best that way.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't really have any idea of what sort of design I'm going to go for. But since you mentioned we'll plan on using a rotary tool after, if the edges are kind of like this little bit here, I might not worry about that because we can just
we'll just cut that off later.
All right, cool. So I'm more focusing on just getting some material, like bulking up areas where I want to be more detailed.
Right.
Like maybe I'll make a spike here and a spike here, so I can start to kind of rough those out.
Yeah, once again, if it gets a little too dry, then just put a little more water on your finger or on your tool and smooth it out.
Steve did some test pieces yesterday to kind of see what kind of detail you can get using some of these tools. And I'm actually really impressed by how much detail this little stylus got in there. So we may want to see if we can add some of that to this sculpt. Ta-da! Uh-oh. Oh, no.
Oh.
So now we know that'll happen.
That's great, though, if you were to make pieces beforehand that you've already got little squiggles and stuff, you know that is actually going to adhere to what's down already.
Yeah, that's good to know. You're right. I'm glad I did that on purpose to showcase the technique. I'm not even going to bother like trying to
do
the inner part because I'll just Dremel that all off later. While I'm working on my mask there, I'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons for all the wonderful support. It's because of you and your dollars that we can afford to have this wonderful workshop and employees to help make more videos. If you'd like to jump in on the fun, get access to behind the scenes vlogs, extra credit videos for our builds, including this one, and early release on our new build videos, and you can head on over to patreon.com/punishedprops. Consider tossing us $1. It helps out a ton, and you can get some really cool extra stuff. Thanks for the support. Let's get back to sculpting some foam clay.
Another type of tool I'd really use with this stuff are the silicone tip tools. Because they have a little bit of give, it doesn't pull the clay near as bad. You still want to wet them, but you can see where it really does a good job just kind of rounding over a lot of those edges.
Mm-hmm. And I was going in with a knife, and this stuff doesn't cut really well. Like if you're used to using monster clay, this is going to be a lot different. It pulls a bit.
Now, if you wait 20 minutes though, then that's where you can start going in with your knife and really defining a lot of those edges.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, kind of like epoxy sculpt. Like you can sculpt it at different times, and the harder it gets, you can do different things to it.
Awesome.
That's what she said.
Thanks, Britt.
When you're not using your clay, because it's air dry, make sure that you're at least like kind of pressing that down to keep that top surface from drying out.
Makes a lot of sense. I even kind of noticed a piece that was sitting out for like 10 minutes I was working from got a little bit stiff while I was working on it.
Yeah, it'll start to develop a skin in about 10 minutes, which you can kind of rehydrate at that point just by taking water and putting it back on the surface.
Oh, that's good. Once it's fully dried though, can you rehydrate it, or is it pretty much done?
No, at that point it's pretty much done.
Okay, that's good to know. I've got kind of the base sculpt done, and I think I'm done with my clay, so I'm going to close it up. And Steve said I should make sure I get all the air out, so that's a good call, Steve. So I'm going to close it almost all the way, press as much air out as I can, and then finish it. I think I'm going to let it dry now. You could go in and sculpt more detail, but I'm not very good at that. I'm going to count on using my Dremel tool. Also, I took like 20 minutes to sculpt this, and it seems like it's kind of skinning.
Yeah, if you're going to do any of the like little bitty details, like with the silicone tools or with the metal tools, it's something you want to do kind of in the beginning, because once it starts to skin over, it'll bounce back.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna let this dry. I'm fairly pleased with that result. And then tomorrow we'll work on some more detail. Here's one of the parts we pulled out of the mold. It's been like 6 or 7 hours.
Yeah.
We let it dry a little bit longer, but we want to test how well it will resist water.
Or if it will absorb more water once it's come out of the mold.
Exactly. So we want to put it in a cup of water overnight, see how it does. There's a problem though. It'll probably float. It will float. Okay, so instead, I got a washer. I'm going to glue it to that, and hopefully that sends it down there. Got a little accelerant I'll put on my washer there, and we'll stick it down like that. Stuck in place, great, and in you go. Thanks for the assist, Steve. All right, we're gonna leave that overnight and see what happens to it. Why is it foaming?
I don't know.
There's some sort of like pudding skin on the top. I predict that the only thing I'm going to find at the bottom of this is a washer.
Is the leftover washer?
It's been here overnight, about 12 hours.
Submerged, completely
submerged. And I don't feel anything down there. The water's very dark. It's like congealing back together.
Yeah, it re-solidified on the surface.
So it looked like that when we started. And I'm going to pour this off and we'll see what's left. So we've got murky gray water, and it's slowly, the goo is slowly going in there.
And a washer.
And there's just a washer left. So this had about 7 hours out of the mold to dry.
Yeah.
And then we put it in water, the whole thing melted. That's a very good thing to know about foam clay.
Well, it just goes to show you, do not take your prop and submerge it in water.
Very good lesson. We've learned some good lessons. Hey, why don't we see how the rest of our things turned out? All these pieces have had a couple of days to dry, and the thinner stuff like this and some of these little guys feel like they're completely dry.
Yeah. The horns that we made, the outside skin is fine. I think the middle of it might still be a little spongy, but another day or two, and I think those would be okay as well.
But we should, even though it's spongy, we should still be able to do some work.
Yeah, we're going to try to do some rotary tool on there, get some texture on it.
Yeah, and then we'll throw some paint on these things and see how they look. Another quick side note, this piece came out of a mold that was perfectly glossy, but you can see the finish, while it is very smooth, is no longer glossy. My guess is that because this stuff shrinks a little bit, that as it shrunk, the outer skin probably just got a tiny bit wrinkled and was no longer shiny. That's my guess anyway.
The question was brought up, if we were to slice this like an EVA foam, would it actually open up? So we're going to check that out. No effect.
I'm going to peel my mask off the face. There we go. And we can do a little bit of work on this. Out of the way, jerk. Mostly what I want to do is clean up these edges. So I got my rotary tool right here ready to go. And then I think I want to add a little bit of texture to it. I've got a bunch of different grinding bits on my rotary tool here, and I'm just playing with some texture, trying to figure out the best way to add a little bit of texture and kind of beating it up a little bit, but I am learning. I wanted to add more of kind of like a hammered metal texture, but I don't have a lot of material to work with here. So I don't want to punch a hole all the way through it. But the cleanup work went really well. This stuff sands very, very well, which is nice. I'm just trying to toe the line between getting a little bit of a divot and drilling a hole all the way through it. So I just have this grinding bit and I'm kind of doing little circles and just trying to make it look a little bit more textured. So I'm going to do a little bit more of that and then we'll throw some paint on this thing and see how it looks.
So here are the two horns that we have been working on. This one was, again, pushed into a mold, and this one was sculpted by hand separate, but then I went in with a rotary tool to add in additional detail lines to it. So at this point, I'm actually going to go in with the rotary tool and sand it so that they look very similar.
This has been an educational couple of days working with a new material, and I gotta tell you, there are a handful of use cases where this stuff really shines. I finished up my mask here. I did some dremeling to add a little bit of texture. It didn't go quite the way I thought. I think just a little bit more practice in picking the right bits would help. But the thing that blew me away the most about this is the areas that I sculpted by hand and used water to smooth with my fingers. Those areas are perfectly smooth. There's no fuzzy bits. I did a couple of coats of this stuff here, peel coat similar to Plasti Dip, and it looked like black rubber. It looked like Batman rubber.
It really did.
And then I just did a couple of layers of just airbrushing some acrylic paints on here, and I'm pretty happy with these results. Making a foam, EVA foam base for me to sculpt on meant I didn't have to worry about symmetry or anything. I think it worked out really well, and I could definitely see a lot of cases where I would use the foam clay like this to get a similar result.
Yeah, I can definitely see applications for this where you're using it as smaller detail pieces on your props themselves, but also like we're messing around with these horns, like this would be perfect for, you know, like an application to your face. I mean, they're extremely lightweight. You just need to use some spirit gum, stick them right on there. I mean, these things are pretty awesome.
Absolutely. So. I could even use the same thing to stick this domino mask on or put a cord around it. The lightweightedness is a massive bonus. If you were to cast these out of a hard plastic, they'd be quite a bit heavier. It's Bill from the future. 1 week after filming the original stuff, we left all this stuff to dry, and we're gonna test a couple of things. First, I wanna try and bend these parts here, see how flexible they are now that they have had a full week to dry. So let's give it a go this way. Oh. That became actually quite brittle. It bent a bit before it snapped, but it did break. Something worth keeping in mind. We'll try this thin guy here if we get similar results. Yeah, so yeah, quite a bit of flex in there, but it will snap. Remember, this isn't EVA foam. This is something different. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but it's important to know and expect that you're not going to get the same amount of flexibility out of this stuff as you will with, say, a strip of EVA foam. It also seems like it has shrunk quite a bit. You can see it kind of indenting there. This little piece here, there's a bit of an indent as it's shrunk in on itself. The surface still looks really, really nice. These horns that Steve sculpted and cast, and he cast one of them and sculpted the other. Paige actually wore these at Emerald City Comic Con. They looked amazing. You can also see, though, that it is dished in the back where it has started to shrink. The shine on there is the adhesive we used to stick this to Paige's face. So that's what you can expect with a piece like that. Here's the mask I made, backed with sheets of EVA foam. The surface still looks really, really nice. Let's see how flexible it is. That's got quite a bit of flex. The layer of foam that I put on there was quite thin, and the EVA foam is still quite flexible. So as a reusable mask, I think this is a really great application for the foam clay. I think once it gets thicker, like maybe this piece right here, you may have a chance of it cracking, but this should bend and stick to my face no problem if I put a little medical adhesive on the back of it. I like this one a lot. The horns, especially being quite stout, they're not going to break on you, and they are very lightweight and still plenty squishy. So as like a reusable facial prosthetic, the foam clay is a fantastic use case. And then finally, another one of these, once it had a week to dry, we dropped it in water, and we're gonna find out if it's still dissolved. And I have a hunch it did, because there's still this weird jello skin on the top of the water. Quite a lot of material coming out of there, and I don't see, oh, this is like the Lucky Charm marshmallow of foam clay that's left. It almost completely dissolved. We put this in the water last night, and it almost completely dissolved. Now, it did stand up a lot better to the one that we tried when it was fresh, but I think it's probably a really good idea that you don't get your foam clay pieces wet, or at least seal them with something that makes them waterproof. Okay, back to Bill from the past. Very educational, and that tub that you brought, maybe hang on to that?
I think I can let you have that one, Bill.
Thanks, buddy. And of course, if you would like to get your hands on some of this stuff, Steve's got a website for you.
Yep, you guys can find that and several other products over at SKSprops.com.
That's right. Now, we only tackled a couple of small example projects here, but I'm sure you've got tons of ideas for what this could be used for. Please share those ideas with us. down in the comments. We'll be sure to read all those comments, and we'll probably use some of this stuff in an upcoming project or two. Wonderful stuff, non-toxic. Thank you again so much for sharing it with us, Steve.
No problem at all. Thank you for having me in the shop. You know, I'm really excited to see what a lot of people do with this.
Yeah,
so.
Me too. Thank you for watching, and of course, thanks to our patrons for helping support what we do here over at patreon.com/punishprops. If you'd like to help out a bit and get some extra content for yourself. That'll do it for us this week. We'll see you in the next build.
I just want to see how well it picks up the texture of, I had something fly in my face.
That wasn't a bug? What happened?
I don't know.
Got a real tight shot of your gross fingernails.
Oh, man.
Don't worry, mine are gross too.
Oh no.